of my preliminary work completed and I'm ready to begin printing. I'm going to be printing first my yellow layer, then magenta, and then cyan. With multi-layer monotype printing, it works best to work from lightest value color to darkest value color. And I'm going to do multiple layers today in a row. Because I only have one brayer, I'm going to be working with printing all of my yellow layers first, then I'll clean up, and then I'll begin printing magenta. And depending on how long those 2 layers take, I may even get through the 3rd layer today as well. So on my printing station, I have set up to the right all of my inks and the things needed to mix and apply my inks. Next to that, I have a piece of PETG plate that's taped down like a hinge, so I can slide my template underneath to align the stencils with the plate. Next to that, I have my printing press, and off camera to the side, I have my water bath for soaking the paper. The PETG plate, you can see, still has the protective coating on it, so the first thing I'm going to do is remove this coating. The inks we're using are Caligo Safe Wash Relief ink, and they're an oil-based printing ink that can clean up with soap and water. And soap and water cleanup is terrific for at-home studios because then it reduces the amount of solvents and cleaners that are needed for cleanup. With monotype printing, the inks will be ready to go right out of the canister, and the only modifier we're going to be using is an extender base. The extender base is basically printing ink without any pigment in it. With my inking station, I tape down a piece of PETG plate. I recommend sliding underneath a piece of white or newsprint drawing paper so that you have an easier time seeing the colors as you're mixing them. Even though the inks clean up with soap and water, I like to wear personal protective equipment such as gloves and an apron when I'm working, and I also keep my hair pulled back and remove anything that's loose and dangling like scarves or necklaces that could potentially drape down into my work area as I'm working. Inks right out of the canister, new inks, are going to be covered over with a seal, such as plastic or wax paper. The inks that you get from the school, you can easily keep the inks protected by cutting a small disc of wax paper or plastic saran wrap and laying that on top. What this will do is prevent an ink skin from forming, and that will allow you to extend the life of your ink and the amount of ink you are able to work with. This skin gets peeled back, and what I'm going to do is take a palette knife and remove a small quantity of ink. When I'm removing ink, I want to try to skim the surface of the ink rather than gouging into the ink to reduce the surface area of the exposed ink. I'm going to replace the skin, and then from the center out, push on the skin to try to remove any air bubbles before replacing the lid. With the yellow being the lightest value ink that we're using, we're going to use the yellow straight out of the canister without modifying it. After putting the ink onto the PETG surface, I'm going to take the palette knife and work it around a little bit to help loosen it up. The friction and the movement causes just a little bit of heat and will make it a little looser rather than being quite as stiff when it's right out of the can. Next, what I'm going to do is draw out a line of ink about the width of my roller, and then take my brayer and start to redistribute it. The flat of ink that's rolled out should be about the width of the brayer squared. This will help to minimize the amount of space that it will take up and also the amount of cleanup that will be required afterwards. What you're looking for with the amount of ink that's on the plate here is for it to have a slight staticky sound and a soft, pebbly surface, almost like the surface of velvet. If it's too soft, and it is very smooth. You may not have enough ink, and if it's too loud and it's a really pebbly surface, really rough surface, then you might have too much ink. So it looks like I have just a little bit too much ink. I'm going to remove a diagonal amount and roll the brayer again to even it out. Notice also that I'm moving the brayer in multiple directions, and I'm picking it up when I get to the end of the roll, and this will allow me to redistribute the ink onto a different portion of the brayer. Now I'm ready to roll out the ink onto my plate. Notice as I was rolling that the first amount was a very even value, and then as the roller went one rotation, there was less ink on the roller, and so it starts to put a lighter amount of ink down on the plate surface. So what we're going to do here on the plate now is move the brayer in multiple directions to try to redistribute the ink. So the first pass of the brayer lays the ink down, and then subsequent passes redistribute it and evens it out. And we're trying for a smooth, even layer of ink on the plate surface. One of the beautiful things about the PETG plates is their transparency. So I can lift up the plate and look at it to see if it's in fact an even layer of ink. Moving over here, I can see then through the plate and through the protective layer of PETG onto my template to see where I want to lay the stencils before printing. You want to avoid touching the surface of the plate as you're handling it because any fingerprints will end up transferring to the final print. After laying the inked up plate onto our template, we're ready to lay down our stencils. And you can see that the stencil that I pre-cut that has the irregular grid has been cut down so that it's going to fit through the press bed, the width of the press bed. I was able to leave the length though because that can continue traveling after the plate has finished rolling through. And I'm going to lay down the stencil on top of the plate surface. I'm now ready to transfer the plate and stencils over to my press bed. You'll want to experiment with what thickness is going to give you the just right pressure in order to transfer the ink from the plate surface onto your printing paper. I found for my press, the standard platform and these two clear plates works very well to give me the just right thickness to allow the ink to transfer from the plate onto the printing paper. I'm going to use this cut piece of craft foam as a cushion. Without the cushion, the printing paper may not push down as readily into the grooves surrounding the edges of the stencil, and you may not get as even and rich of a transfer. On the press bed, I'm laying my inked up plate, ink side up, with the stencils on top. I'm laying my printing paper that's been pre-soaked, front side down. And this is a bleed print, so I'm trying to be very careful about laying my paper so that it's placed exactly over the dimensions of the plate. On top of this, I'm going to lay a piece of newsprint. And then the craft foam cushion. And all of this then will travel through the printing press. It's good to roll with firm, even pressure all the way through to the other side. If you stop partway through, you may end up with a line in the middle of the print from the extra pressure. Let's remove the print from the corner up. And we can see a nice even transfer of ink. Because we're printing multiple colors on the same day, and we want our paper to stay moist, we're going to put it into a plastic bag with a piece of wet paper towel, and this will keep the moisture in the paper so it doesn't dry out before we're able to get to the next layer. And I'm going to lay the printing paper with the ink facing up, a piece of newsprint. I'll put all this into my plastic bag with the wet paper towel. And seal this up until I'm ready to put in the second print. Between layers, I'm going to clean my press bed. Minor residue wipes away with a paper towel and a general cleaner, such as dish soap and then water, simple green, or vinegar and water. Thicker ink should be wiped away first with baby oil or vegetable oil, and then degreased after using a general cleaner. Removing the stencil, we can see that there's some really interesting marks left on the plate surface, and this is called a ghost print. And it looks like there's really lovely markings from where the stencil was overlaid on the plate surface and protecting some of the ink on the plate, so that ink will end up being fairly rich. I'm going to leave this ink as it is and then modify the image by adding a wax paper stencil to block the ink. So this portion then will end up printing pure white. The remaining portions will have some yellow ink transfer. I'm ready to go to my second print. With the ink mixed to the desired transparency, we're ready to roll it out into a nice even flat using our brayer. Cyan is the last layer, and because cyan is such a dark value ink, we're going to be mixing it fairly generously with extender base. At least 50-50, if not 75% extender base to 25% cyan. Just like with the previous colors, I have a small amount of both cyan and extender base. I would say about a teaspoon worth of ink since we're working at such a small size. And it's best to add the darker or stronger pigment to the lighter or weaker pigment. So I'm going to begin with a pile of the extender base and then add a small amount of the cyan to the extender base and mix it up. When I'm mixing, I want to make sure it's very evenly mixed, so I'm going to scoop, flip, and push with my palette knife. Bringing over my test color swatch, I'm going to take a small amount of the mixed ink. I'm going to drag it across so it goes across the paper and the other mixed colors to see what color blending takes place. This still appears to be fairly dark in value, so I'm going to mix even more extender base into this. And I can see I have a little bit more color mixing taking place, with green forming when the cyan and yellow overlap, and then purple forming when the cyan and magenta overlap. Now to roll out the ink. Raising the plate up to ensure that it's an even coverage. I notice that there's a slightly lighter band in the center, so I'm going to go over it one more time with the brayer. And that evened it out. Here I'm using a halves division that's a textured paper, and I'm going to ink up the surface to get some of this texture to transfer. When I'm trying to move a delicate stencil, I find it easiest to use an X-Acto knife for an assist. This will allow me to pick up the corner to reposition or remove the stencil.